Hello and welcome to the National Black MBA Association's Gold Key webinar, Managing Professional Risks, Priorities, and Decisions, and we thank you for joining us. Before I turn things over to our esteemed presenter, I'd like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of this web event technology. At any time, you may adjust your audio using any computer volume settings you may have. Over on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the Q&A window to submit your question, which we invite and encourage you to do. Type it in the small text box at the bottom, and when finished, click the Send button. You may submit your questions at any time during the program, and our presenter will address those after today's presentation. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Priscilla Archangel. Priscilla is a sought-after speaker, teacher, and author, blogger, and believes that everything rises and falls on leadership. So with no further ado, Dr. Archangel, the audience is all yours.
Thank you so much, and I am so happy to be here with you all. I appreciate the National Black MBA Association for inviting me to share with all of you today. These are some of the favorite things that I do in terms of sharing insights on leadership with rising leaders in organizations of all sizes. And so I've been asked to talk with you today on managing professional risk, and hopefully you all see the Q&A area in your screen there, and I'd like to invite you to submit questions along the way as we go. I will definitely save time at the end to respond to your questions. I have tried to cover a lot of topics around this subject, but I know that I haven't covered everything, and I know that some of you have some specific types of questions and situations that you may be wondering about. So I look forward to your questions, and please let me assure you also that I will treat them with confidentiality, so this can be a very sensitive topic at times. But thank you. So just a little bit of background. Some of you probably see from the history that you received in advance of this that I spent a number of years at a Fortune 10 company. And no one would spend 30 years there in these days and times because people are used to shifting jobs for different opportunities much more frequently. And I will tell you that when I started, I said, maybe I'll stay there about 10 or 15 years. And things got good, and my career was going well, and I was enjoying my work, and I ended up staying there 30 years. And my focus there was human resources, organizational development, a variety of executive roles, global executive roles there. And when I left, I started my own business as leadership development consulting, doing what I call the favorite part of my work. So that's coaching leaders and consulting with them on leadership development topics. So one of the important topics as leaders that I hope you all appreciate is understanding emotional intelligence. And you may have heard that you can get to where you can get to a certain point in your career based upon your intelligence, your IQ, shall I say, and your smarts and your technical capability. But to really be successful and progress forward, you have to increase your level of capability in terms of your emotional intelligence, which is how you recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions, as well as how you recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. And the Daniel Goleman model that you see here is pretty common. It's self-awareness, it's self-management, it's social awareness and relationship management. And one spot to spend some time and emphasis is in that social awareness quadrant, upper right, where we're talking about organizational awareness. A synonym for that might be political savvy. And I said savvy, I didn't say that you have to be a political activist necessarily, but you have to be very, very savvy about what the politics are in the organization and become aware of different positions that people are taking, where power is centered in an organization, how that power shifts around, and what the organization's priorities are. And then you have to use that awareness to manage relationships, such as influence and inspiring others and developing others and building bonds and teamwork and collaboration with others. So these are some very, very important principles to make sure that you are up to speed on. So with that as a basis, understanding emotional intelligence, let's talk a little bit more about managing professional risk. And I thought I would start out by sharing with you just some examples of some significant risk I've had to manage throughout my career. And I can laugh in retrospect at some of them, but when I was going through it, it wasn't necessarily fun nor easy. So one was in the late 90s, and I had just been promoted to an executive level in my organization, and you probably have something similar in your organizations where it's what I'll call the big jump, the big promotion at whatever level it is. It's the big promotion that is available only to many fewer people. And you work hard for it, and when you get there, it's not like you can relax and say, oh, I've arrived. Instead, you say, oh, my goodness, now I have to prove myself and make sure the people that made this decision on my behalf aren't sorry or regretting it in any way. And so, if anything, you tend to work harder. And so I had just gotten that big promotion, and I was in a brand new position. It was a newly created position in the organization as a result of some reorganization that had gone on. And I had a new leader who was also new to the company. And we were doing a lot of hiring at a more senior level in the organization, more so than had ever been done in probably a few decades. And my new boss could be very, very, very charming at times. And then at other times, he could be a tyrant. Ugh. And in that context, we might all be sitting around in a staff meeting, and it was, okay, who's going to be, in the middle today? Who's going to be on the recipient end of some of his concerns today, to put it mildly? And as the HR leader for the organization, one of my challenges was, how do I coach up? All right? So we're used to maybe coaching people who report to us or coaching people who are lower than us in the organization on the hierarchical ladder, so to speak. But how do you coach your boss and, in essence, try to get your boss to think about some different behaviors that might be more effective with the team? And to add to that, I was trying to make sure that me and my team performed up to his expectations. At the same time, I was trying to find ways to help him moderate his behavior, at least in my mind, at times. And so it was a tricky situation, and how I managed it really varied from day to day as I would try to sense his mood, sense everyone else's mood, sense how he might be perceiving, what me and my team were doing on a given day. One of the things I had to figure out how to do was to, I call it, coach him before he made up his mind about something. So I had to try to ascertain where he was going and what he was thinking about and influence his thinking before he got there and before he, made an announcement or made a decision. Because once he spoke it, the chances of him changing his mind were relatively slim. And so it was a bit like a tightrope walk on an ongoing basis. And I wish I could tell you that there was a conclusion to it, but one of the things that we find with managing risk like this is that it simply evolves. There's no clear resolution. It shifts and evolves over time. Another example was I was in a labor relations role several decades ago, and I was the new person in the plant. And people in my chair, I was a manager of labor relations, would typically come and go every couple of years. So when I came, it's like, okay, so what? She'll be gone soon enough, we can wait her out, because a lot of other people had been there for 20, 30 years. And so as a young African-American woman in a plant that was filled with generally middle-aged Caucasian white males, it was kind of like, who is she and what is she doing here, you know? And so as I tried to assert whatever authority or power I had in my position, or thought I had in my position, as I tried to influence decisions and outcomes, as I tried to really build relationships with some of the key people in the plant, I had to understand where the power lay, and it wasn't necessarily in my office. It was typically with somebody out on the floor, or, you know, understanding what agreements already existed that may not have been very, very clear to me. And then as I tried to do things that I thought were in the best interest of the people in the facility, there were always other agendas that people were working that I had to try to figure out, that I had to try to be mindful of. And so the shop chairman and I would butt heads frequently, okay? And even got to the point of, I'll call it, imagine us standing toe-to-toe, my hands on my hips, okay, and me trying to tell him what I thought of what he was doing, okay? So that's kind of like a non-starter, especially if anybody's watching, and he's got to make sure that, you know, all of his people understand where the power lays, because it couldn't be with me. It had to be with him. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to find the right balance of relationships with him and some of the other key people in the plant, and trying to drive some change that I thought would be important in that facility, and that I thought would be beneficial in that facility. And I succeeded in a few areas, and I did not succeed in a lot of areas, but that was life. And it almost became, how do I survive until my time is up on this assignment, okay? Another significant risk in my career was I was working for two leaders, and in my own HR leadership role, I supported, you know, various different areas of the company. And in this case, I had several senior people that I supported, and two of them became at odds with one another, all right? And it got a little extreme in some cases, just in terms of their interactions. And so my role was to try to help them make peace, resolve their differences, find a way to get along in the organization. Add to that complication, one of them was African American, one was Caucasian. And so then there's a question of, you know, is my allegiance to the one that is the more senior person? Is it to the one that is African American like me? Is it what? Okay. And so I had to navigate very carefully, because in reality it couldn't be any of that. But I had to find a way to navigate very carefully and try to identify the issues, try to find a way to get them to talk through them, to respect one another, to listen to one another, to give each other some room to lead in their respective areas. And I wish I could tell you that we had a really happy outcome, but it was a strained outcome that eventually one left the organization, okay? And even though the issue was between the two of them, and I had nothing to do with why the issue came to light or what drove the issue, I had nothing at all to do with that, there was some implication that why couldn't I get them to come to a better resolution, all right? Now, how do I manage that? I had to, on one hand, make sure that the right other people knew what was going on, knew what the issues were behind their conversations, knew what I was doing to try to negotiate and broker peace between them. And so I had to kind of report out to the right people politically what I was doing, yet try to handle it and try to keep some confidences appropriately as I worked with each of them, because I was trying to make sure that they had trust in me to respect their concerns. And so it was a literal balancing act with a broader number of people than just the two of them. And I didn't want to publicly embarrass either one of them in any way, but at the same time I had to share enough information so that those other people would know what wasn't my fault, so to speak, so that I could save some face and be viewed as part of the solution and not part of the problem. So it was really, really complex. The end result, things just evolved and we moved on somehow. But these are all the types of experiences that others in your organization remember. And they get images of you and your roles and your contribution or lack thereof in their perception to things that are going on in the organization. And there's nothing that you can do to avoid these situations, and there's nothing you can do to adequately prepare for them, because they are part of organizational life and interpersonal dynamics. And even if you are not driving confusion or negative issues in the organization, other people around you will, and you will get caught in it. And I'm sure many of you experience that now. So the point of the picture here, too, is it's kind of like a game of chess, all right? You have to just be very, very strategic with it. So what types of risk are you experiencing? And here are a couple of examples that you are probably experiencing. One is, what job do I accept? It starts the day you finish your bachelor's or your MBA degree, and it continues to go on and on from there as you try to research options, network with people, gain as much information as possible about various positions, the leadership in an organization, the culture, the compensation opportunities, what types of responsibilities you will have, the career growth prospects. What's the difference between what they're telling you and reality, because certainly, everyone's on their best behavior always. And you try to put all this together and make the best decision possible, but it is a risk. And it's a huge one that can impact directionally what happens well or not so well in your career. All of us know people who have taken on a job and, 6 months, 12 months into that job, something happens and the company, goes into bankruptcy, or that department is eliminated and everyone is let go, or. And so you do the best you can, but there are some things that you just cannot fully plan for or anticipate. Another risk you experience is, who do I align myself with politically in the organization? So there are times when leaders are going to adopt conflicting positions, or they'll have some negative interpersonal dynamics, or their team members and others in the organizations are going to feel forced to take sides. And, some of us like to think, okay, I'll stay in Switzerland. I'll stay in neutral territory. I'm going to try to just, not to obviously take sides with anyone, because I don't know where this is going and I don't know who's going to win this particular organizational battle or whatever. But there are plenty of times when being neutral just isn't possible, especially the farther you move up the ranks. And you may have to look at who is right maybe on a particular issue versus who's more powerful on a particular issue, and make some decisions accordingly. You may have to make decisions on what's your personal brand. So, as you look at your area of specialization or your expertise or, your visual presence or your networks or your professional approach, how are you going to leverage your strengths? What opportunities are you going to go after versus not go after? Branding, we hear a lot more these days about branding ourselves, and, personal brand is what they say about you when you're not in the room. So we can work really hard on the brand we want to present, but the real question is, what are people saying about us when we are not around? But at the same time, we have an opportunity to begin to craft that and to begin to set that up to try to be seen in a way that we want to be seen. And one of the major choices is a brand that you think others will be attracted to versus a brand that you may be passionate about. So you may find in your organization that there's a body of work or specialization or set of strengths or type of branding that really is exciting to you, but it is not as valued in the corporation or the organization as you want it to be. So you may try to brand yourself in a different way that is more politically acceptable and politically interesting. But there's trade-offs with all of that. You might have a risk around the question of what's your summary recommendation on a project, okay? So you're working on a project, you're looking at all the data, you have to come up with a recommendation, you have to present that recommendation at a leadership meeting, and there may be a difference between what you really want to say, what you really want to present, what you really think your recommendation should be versus the politics of the people around the table. And you have to figure out how you're going to present it. And even you have to figure out how to make sure you have support from enough people in the room before you walk into the room with your presentation. So there's a term, there's an ancient Japanese term that I'm going to mispronounce, but it's called nimiwashi. And it's basically the meeting before the meeting. So, you're hopefully meeting with some of the key people in that room before the formal presentation to make sure you have their support, to make sure you're addressing their issues with your topics, to make sure that you are not going to say something that's going to offend someone or tick someone's negative box and open up a whole different area of politics. Sometimes it's around recommendations on, are you appropriately minimizing safety issues or maximizing profits or downplaying quality issues, depending upon where those topics are in the organization. You have to know what the hot buttons are and how to proceed carefully. Another type of risk may be you have a friend at work and you value your friend, you think your friend is doing some great work, but for whatever reason, others in the organization may not agree. The politics around your friend may be less than you want them to be, and you may feel like you have to make some decisions between whether you maintain that friendship or whether you gravitate somewhere else in the organization for political expediency or for the sake of your career. Those are really tough decisions, all right? And then you may have the question of how do I show up on my new job? So the way you transition into the workplace and set priorities with your team or maybe work with a coach to become acclimated can make all the difference on a successful start. So I remember one time I got promoted to an assignment, and it was a really nice choice assignment, and I was going to meet my team for the first time. Now, I knew a number of them already, but now I was going in the room to meet them as their new leader. And in fact, one of the people that was working for me was someone who I had worked for like 4 years earlier, okay? So those situations happen too. And I'd made some notes to myself to make sure that I said some key things. And I will tell you the main mistake I made was I looked at my notes too much. as opposed to using them as just thought starters and speaking without glancing at them as much as I did. And I know I was nervous, and I was trying to kind of get the feel for this new role because it was just something new and different for me. But that, again, set an initial tone that I had to then shift as I got into the role, because it was obvious to my team that she's a little nervous in that new role, okay? So those are the types of things that you may experience. So what do you do with this and more of the situations that you find yourself in? And let me again encourage you to submit questions, because I will save time at the end to make sure I respond to your questions. So one of the first things that you do before you even know what some of your professional risks are in your organization is make sure that you identify your priorities and values. So that means knowing what you stand for, and we hear words like, I believe in integrity, and I believe in respect, and I believe in communicating with people. But you really have to break that down into what does that mean in terms of behaviors, because every one of those things will always be challenged in some form or fashion. And you have to understand when those choices come at you, what are you really, really going to do? It could be as simple as, well, everybody submits an expense report for a little more than they actually spent. You need to do it too, so that you don't make us look bad. Well, that's a decision you have to have made before you go in the role, because in the heat of the moment, you may waver. So you have to really understand what integrity means to you and how you evidence integrity in your role. Talk about communication, for example. I like to tell my teams that I want to make sure they know as much as I do on things that are going on, because information empowers them to make good decisions in their roles. And so I did not want to hoard information as a form of hoarding power. I wanted to empower them by giving them as much information and allowing them to make certain decisions. But that meant I had to know really what communication meant to me in advance. And it also means that I had to evaluate, as some situations came up, how much am I going to share? How, am I going to trust them with some really, really sensitive information because I want them to know what's going on, as opposed to withholding it from them. So that begins to drive behaviors. Know what your values are. Know what you stand for. One of the things that people recognized about me was, don't go to Priscilla and try to do something a little left of center, okay? That isn't quite right. And I'm not saying that there were people who wanted to, but nonetheless, they knew where I stood and where I would draw the lines on particular issues. But at the same time, they knew I would try to be creative within those boundaries and help them get to the right result that they desired. But know what your priorities and values are. It might even be related to family, because you might be asked to do some things in your role that would conflict with your priorities for your family. It could be traveling on a day that is your child's birthday, okay? And it's important to you to be there for your child's birthday, whatever the case may be. Know what those values are and know where you stand. And know that there may be a time where you would have to make a specific decision on that too. The next step is properly recognizing where risk exists, okay? So I call it identifying the potholes, which are the smaller consequences, from the landmines, which are the major consequences. So here it is your ability to begin to anticipate issues in the organization, to know where conflict is particularly occurring, to know where people have different positions and opinions on things. I remember many years ago when I first started, there were two leaders, one reported to another, and they didn't talk to one another. They were, I don't even know what the historical issue was for them, but they literally did not communicate. And so if it's an HR topic, I was kind of like carrying the message between them. And so I had to be very careful of what I said to one about what the other said, and not letting one make a decision that the other would be vehemently opposed to. So I had to just begin to anticipate the issues that would come up between these two particular leaders. So it's being politically savvy, it's being sensitive to how individuals and organizations operate, it's knowing who's connected. So, these are obvious things is, who's getting together on the weekend, who's playing golf on the weekend together, or whose spouses are friends, or who worked together in a different role 5 years earlier where they, developed a friendship. And even though they may look like they're in two different areas of the organization now, they still have that friendship going, and they're watching out for each other's back, okay? Know your leaders' professional priorities, know their business practices, know their business principles. It's really learning everything you can about the people in the organization so you can begin to recognize where the risk exists, where an issue may occur. And then, as you know where those risks potentially exist, you can begin to anticipate some probabilities. What's the likelihood of a negative consequence here? So, again, this is part of your political savvy, part of your organizational awareness. And as you move along in your career, you develop an instinct and a sixth sense. And so based on my experience, there are a lot of times where I can look at certain things and say, okay, we have a problem brewing here. And, one of two things are going to happen. And to the extent that one can anticipate the probabilities, it helps us to be set up to then determine some mitigating responses. So in that context, how are you building coalitions and support? So you're developing relationships with leaders across your organization. You are talking to them about projects that you're working on. You're getting advice from them. You are incorporating some of their recommendations in the things that you're doing. You're helping them to think that your solutions are their solutions and vice versa, so they feel in alignment with you. You're gaining support from a variety of people. You are trying not to be seen as a political operative or maneuvering politically between people in the organization, but trying to be seen as someone who is supportive of a broader variety of the organization. You are weighing the pros and cons of different responses and different alternatives that can happen in the organization, and therefore trying to effectively anticipate and look at what some outcomes may be. And then you can begin to determine the potential impact. And I like this picture because it's kind of like a drop of water produces a ripple. And sometimes we like to think that the impact of something that we do might be very, very small, when instead it can have a huge rippling effect. So the impacts can be political in the organization, and I have seen people kind of caught in a negative political impact for something that they didn't necessarily do something wrong, but maybe they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the wrong part of the organization, working for the wrong person who disagreed with the wrong thing, and they just had an unfortunate political impact. And then I've seen them 3 years later, 5 years later, have a really positive political impact, and their career took a shift for the better. And it's almost impossible to anticipate. I've seen people who I thought, okay, they're done. Their career is washed up here. The politics, with regard to them, it's just not going anywhere. And then, again, other people around them change and shift. The organization shifts, and their career takes off again. So it really is hard to predict. And a lot of times when we're in that situation, we think, woe is me, the earth is closing in on me. I can only tell you that things can sometimes change as quickly as they change for the better, as quickly as they might have changed for the worse. And there's only so much you can do about it, but you can try to at least control those things that you can. Sometimes the impact is financial. Financial might be loss of a particular level or status in the organization. It might be missing out on a promotion. It might be job loss. Again, being at the wrong place at the wrong time in the organization. Or the financial impact might be loss of funding for a project or somehow negative impact to company revenues, okay? These are all the things to begin to think about as you're navigating through the organization and trying to control those things that you can as much as possible. There are other impacts such as your career, the direction your career may go in. I was talking with someone just yesterday who 3 years ago was put into a new assignment and allowed to use his creative juices in a new and different way to lead a particular part of the organization. But over time, reorganizations and shifting of people, and his role grew into a position that was considered redundant, and he's no longer with the company. In hindsight, he's not sure that there is anything that he could have done to stop it because you cannot always anticipate where it's going. But the biggest opportunity for him was to stay on top of his skill sets, his strengths, be aware of what was going on in the world around him outside of the company in terms of opportunities in his area of expertise, so that he makes sure he still has some competitive skills and his chances of getting a job elsewhere are enhanced from that. The impact may be on personal brand. Sometimes that branding gets tarnished, so to speak, but it can be reinvented in new and different ways. And so sometimes it's a matter of seeing what you have and how can you shape and shift it in a very different way. I shifted my brand when I retired from my company after 30 years. I shifted my personal brand to, again, that 30% of my job that was the favorite work that I did, and I made it 80% of my role, and branded myself in a new way and really worked on my brand in the external realm much more than I did in the internal company before. So there are times when you are working for organizations and you really have to just play to those people within your company, all right? They don't care about anything outside the organization. You just have to play to that group within your company. And then there are other times when you really need to play to a much broader audience across multiple industries, multiple companies, and I would really recommend that all of you think about the latter more so as much as you possibly can, because what I see too much of is that people are defined by their current title and their current employer, and if something happens and they lose that, it's almost as if they've lost their identity for a moment. And it's much better to be defined by and branded by your area of expertise, the strengths that you have, the things that you do well, and make sure that you use social media even, like LinkedIn, to promote that personal brand, all right? You never know what opportunities might find you because you are visible to others versus kind of keeping your head down, working in a company and not knowing what opportunities are out there. And I'm not saying that you have to leave your current company. I'm just saying you need to know what the opportunities are in the broader world. And then reputational is one of the most significant impacts that any of us can deal with, because it's a bit more far-reaching, and it's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. But just think of, pick up your Wall Street Journal at any given time and look in some of the business pages, and you can see people who are suffering a reputational hit, sometimes for business decisions they've made, sometimes just because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's much more public, and it is much more difficult to overcome. But the biggest thing I would say is it's kind of find the needle in that haystack and find out what you can do with it to improve it, okay? This is an odd example probably, but all of you probably heard of the I think if they call it the varsity blue scandal or whatever. In any event, the students that were helped by their parents in various ways to get into the right school. And one of the articles that I've read talks about a gentleman whose name I don't remember offhand, but he went to prison some years earlier for a white-collar crime, and now he makes his business counseling other individuals who are indicted, convicted on white-collar crimes about how to survive prison life, okay? Now, that's an unusual spin if I've ever heard one, and it's not one that I would wish on anyone, but it does go to show that when you take a reputational hit, there are some different things that you can do to spin it for good, okay? So, I think this is the last slide, and again, feel free to submit your questions. Navigating risk, you have to make sure you're focused on your own integrity, whatever that means to you, being true to yourself in terms of the integrity that you want to hold and bring to your role. You have to make sure that you focus on safety in your work environment. We can all think of examples where safety, for one reason or another, appeared to have been compromised in various settings, and there was some potential or actual harm that was done to people, because in hindsight at least, more opportunities could have been taken advantage of to ensure safety. Quality, that's important as well. The quality of the product, the quality of the service. Make sure that your quality is of the highest standard so that there is nothing that anyone can come back and say that something significant was missed there. Ensure fairness in everything that you do. And again, these are all about things that can come back to bite you. Someone can come back and complain that you didn't sufficiently fulfill your role. So being fair and also being clear in what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and how you have actually followed through. So those are some general tips on navigating risk. So, what questions do you have? Looking for questions.
And as a reminder to our audience, the Q&A box can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. To submit a question, please type it in the small text box at the bottom, and when finished, click send or push enter. And pardon the interruption there. Just wanted to give people another heads up on how they can queue up.
Thank you very much, Don. So here's the first question. What advice would you give someone who's looking to make a transition from one industry to another? So the primary thing is, as you look at the type of work you're doing in your current industry, what does that look like in the other industry? How is the role performed? What are the similarities? What are the differences in how it's performed? Talk with people who are in that industry to understand the processes in the context of what are the challenges, what are the issues, how does work flow in and how does work flow out of that industry and that type of organization. So I'm a big process-focused person too, and any organization I've ever worked with, I want to understand how problems or issues come in the door, how they're processed through, and how they go out the door, and what the metrics are in terms of measurements of success for them. So you've got to do a lot of research, because one of the things you have to do is convince the leaders in that industry that your prior industry experience is relevant to their industry. And so that is your job to do. You might have to take a lateral move in order to just get in the door and then move up from there. Or you might find you have a contact or a network with someone who has, who knows you, who values your skill set, maybe somebody you've worked with before, who can bring you in and help you learn that industry. But the biggest thing is find ways to learn that industry and be able to share and know and understand the relevance of your prior industry skills to that industry. All right, I'm reading a few more questions here. As I reflect on my career, is there one major pitfall I wish I avoided or glad I avoided? That's a very interesting question. I'm going to think about that, and I'm going to come back to it, and I promise I'll come back to it, too. How about that? Here's another question. Our white counterparts have reaped humongous benefits from the Old Boys Network. How can mid- and top-level black managers achieve same, especially given our NBMBA membership? Can we leverage our affinity into a network of some consequence? So one thing I'll say is, yes, create your own network, especially within the National Black MBA Association. Absolutely create your network. Broaden it. Go to the conferences. Meet as many people as you can. Stay in contact in some way, form or fashion with as many people as you can. Help other people, because what you sow, you will reap. Others will be able to help you as well. So networking is absolutely huge. But don't confine your networking just to African Americans, all right? You've got to be much broader than that. I will tell you, 35 years ago when I started my career, I walked into a room where I was the only African American and or woman. And today, the same thing happens. And it's like, I don't believe this. Has nothing changed? And I mean, maybe it's not as often or as frequent, but it still happens. Now, part of the sad thing is it takes me a half hour to recognize it, because I don't even pay attention to it anymore, and then all of a sudden I look up and say, why am I the only one here, okay? But at the same time, I expect that I'm supposed to be there, so I don't look at myself as, oh, I'm a fish out of water, I don't belong here, there's something wrong. I expect that I'm supposed to be in the room. And to the extent that no one else is there, that's unfortunate, and I'll try to do things to bring more people in, but I don't let it faze me in the way that I relate to people. Now, I can't do the things that the quote-unquote old boys do. No, I'm not going to, go golfing with a bunch of guys every Saturday or go to the bar for drinks at night after a meeting. There's some things that I just, choose not to do, and I'm willing to take that risk. But there are other things I will do in the context of building relationships with them during, work-related events or, the appropriate breakfast, lunch, or dinner event, things like that I will do. So broaden your network to as many people as you possibly can. There are some you'll never quite fit into and you just can't worry about it, but still continue to broaden it. And don't feel like you're out of place anywhere just because there may be no one that looks quite like you. And so now I'm going to go back to the previous question. Is there one major pitfall I wish I avoided or glad I avoided? I am glad I stuck to my guns in terms of there are certain situations I'm not going to let myself get involved in. So there were times when I traveled for work with groups of people, and, you do the work events and there's the dinners, and then, after that, it's kind of go to the bar and have some drinks and sit around and talk. And mind you, there's a lot of business type things that get done there just in the context of people feeling comfortable with one another and talking about things. But at the same time, as a African American woman, I don't need to be around a bunch of guys that might have had a little too much to drink. Okay? So that's not what I chose to do. And so I might leave the party a little early. I developed my own intuition that, okay, I've come, I've seen, I've networked, I've talked with people, I've laughed with people, my thing was like a glass of water or maybe a glass of ginger ale. Ginger ale was probably about as hard as I got in terms of my drinks. But I had my full faculties too. I knew everything that was going on. And I knew when my time was done, and whatever you guys choose to do afterward is up to you, and I'm willing to deal with that. And if you don't think that I'm one of you because I wasn't up late enough or because I didn't let you make a pass at me or whatever, tough. I don't care. So that's my answer to that question. Let's see. I like the potholes versus the landmines. Who helped you watch your blind spot? Oh, that's a good question. I always try to have a truth teller, and a truth teller is someone who will tell you what's going on and you can listen to them. And the point is they'll tell you in a way that you can hear it because you respect them. You've come to trust them enough, and it can be someone that works for you, or it can be a peer, or it can be someone, somewhere else in the organization that is more senior than you. But I always try to find a truth teller who wouldn't be afraid to come and say, hey, Priscilla, you need to watch out for this, or, people are thinking this, or people are saying that, or when you said this and did this in the meeting, people kind of, it turned them off. So find someone you can trust. It could be your admin. It could be anyone as long as they're willing. And it can be several people because people will see you in different contexts, all right? As long as they're willing to tell you what they're seeing and they see that you don't ignore them or you don't push back or debate them about it. Just listen, ask questions, receive it, okay? Next question. Do you think grad students should coach and speak? Well, when you coach or you speak, you have to have something that your audience wants to listen to and believes that you know more than them about and they can learn from you, okay? So it's more a matter of finding your right audience. I admit I see some people who speak or say they want to speak, and I wonder how much experience they have. And not experience speaking, life experiences, professional experiences, all right? So in order for anyone to listen to you, you have to have enough experiences in life in general on whatever topic you're speaking about so that your audience feels they can learn from you. So grad students absolutely have something to say. You just have to know the right topic and the right audience. All right, next question. What advice would you have for someone who accepted an early retirement package nearly 2 years ago but now seeks to re-enter the workforce, acknowledging that the non-compete has expired? So you are simply between successes, as I like to call it, and it's fine to re-enter the workforce. The biggest thing I would tell you is figure out what you want to do. Make sure you know your purpose, your passion, know what you're good at. Sometimes you get into careers that evolve over time and, I like 50% of my job and the other 50% of my job I don't want to ever have to do again. Figure out what you're good at, what you do really well, what your purpose in life is, and find a role that feeds that, okay? And recognize you may pivot in some way and do something with a little different spin on it. I talk to plenty of people who spend, 30 years in in one career area, retire from that, and want to do something, for instance, in a nonprofit realm or something else. Or like me, I'm doing consulting. And now I say that I had 30 years of corporate life to prepare me for this because I've seen a little bit of everything, and it makes me better at what I do now. Next question, what types of meetings do you recommend for accessing mainstream career influences? For instance, old boys. So the main thing I would say is, how do you develop a relationship with them? What can you find in common with them that you all can talk about and identify with? And so as you identify a quote-unquote old boy, you might start out just getting to know them, maybe go out to lunch, go out to breakfast, find out what their interests are, what their career path has been. Ask them for advice. People always love to give advice. So ask them for some advice on some area of your career, or maybe ask them for some support in something that you're working on that is easy for them to give support on. They will love doing that. But start building a network and find out what you can gain and what you can learn from them. And if they find that you are already and a willing learner, they will be more interested in pouring into you, pouring their knowledge into you, okay? But try to do it in a way that really honors honors your integrity, and you're not just doing it to be manipulative, because that's the downside of this, or to, just a self-serving relationship, okay? Take a genuine interest in them. I will never forget one gentleman, a very senior gentleman in our organization, and the politics shifted on him rapidly one day, and I mean literally. I got to my office one morning, and I was then walking down the hall to see him because stuff was happening, and I knew I needed to talk to him. And as I was reading my email, my email on the way into his office, and he was reading his at the same time, we got a message from someone else that basically kind of said his career was taking a dive bomb. And I spent a lot of time just sitting in his office with the door closed, almost saying nothing. It was like, what's the term, sitting Shiva, the Jewish community, when someone passes and, you kind of sit with the family for, a period of 7 days or something like that. I felt like it was like a mourning period, and we would just kind of sit there quietly sometimes, and I was just trying to kind of talk him off the ledge and help him to find a way to regain his self-confidence and respect in the organization, okay? But, that provided a relationship for us that was also very positive in terms of, he still had some opportunity to influence my career positively. So it's building a genuine relationship. What are ways you can redeem your reputation once it's been tarnished, and how can we be proactive when looking for new opportunities? One of the things I would say is, if you have made a mistake, admit it, and talk with some key mentors about how you can regroup and regain what you've had or what you can do differently, all right? So most of us don't purposefully tarnish our reputation. It's generally a mistake, but just admit it. Show willingness to learn, show openness to feedback, and even as you look for new opportunities, whether within your company or within another company, there's a way of communicating. So someone says, so why are you looking for a new job? You don't have to tell them the sordid details, but you can simply say, things like, the priorities shifted in the organization, the politics shifted, it was time for me to move on, and I'm looking forward to joining another organization that has such and such priorities, all right? But don't beat yourself up, move on. It happens to lots of people. It's a matter of how they play it. And some people, quite frankly, spin it in such a way that it's almost unbelievable to me. But just don't wallow in it. Admit it, face up to it, and focus on what you need to do differently and move on. And I think I'm out of time, but I think I got to almost all the questions. So thank you all. I love your questions. I hope that you found my responses to be helpful. So I will pause now and turn it over to Don.
On behalf of NBMBAA, I'd like to thank our presenter for a great program, and thank you, the audience member, for your participation in today's event. You will soon be redirected to complete a post-event survey. Webinars are an important part of our programming, and your feedback is vital to the improvements and developments of future events. Please take a few minutes to complete this post-event survey. This concludes today's program. Again, we thank you for attending and hope you have a nice day.